Hi everybody, thanks for joining my talk here. I hope everybody's having a really good event this week. And as Gary mentioned, I've recently joined as the product owner of Turbo 360. So if anybody wants to talk to me about any of our features afterwards, please come and give me a shout. In today's session, I'm going to talk about some real world experiences since I kind of complemented what I used to do in integration. I now focus quite heavily on cost management and cost optimization. And I want to share some of the experiences that I've found. And I think there'll be a lot of things people can take away from today. So a little bit about me. I've been a Microsoft MVP for a long time. In a second, I'm going to put a couple of polls up just to get a flavor of what people feel about their current costs. That's a short link to it, but I'll have a link on the next slides as well. So my question really about your usage of Azure, I'm speaking to customers all the time and I'm finding customers are hemorrhaging money all over the place. They're delivering really good stuff on Azure, but people are spending money and it just keeps getting bigger and they're not really sure. Sometimes they don't even know the problem exists, but it just keeps getting bigger and they don't know what to do about it. So a couple of slides here. I'm hoping my poll will appear for everybody, so feel free to add your bit. If anybody has a problem, can someone just give me a thumbs up that you can get to the poll? Yeah, perfect. So we'll give that a second for people. So really the question here is, what is your current spend on Azure for the team? And I find we meet customers who have a very wide range in spend. We meet a lot of customers who are just getting started, spending a very small amount, and we meet other customers who are spending an eye-watering amount of money on Azure and everywhere in between. So I think the general flavour there is it's quite well spread. My next question is going beyond the integration team for your entire organisation on Azure. How much are you spending? Now, one of the things that I'll expect to find here is a lot of people may have an idea roughly of what their team spend is, but they don't know about the bigger organization. That starts touching on the first challenge. If you don't know, the big picture, how much do you actually spend on Azure as an organization? So we can see we've got a bit of a sort of preference in that 50 to 100K range here. Now, the next question is, how confident are you that your organization's using Azure efficiently and managing costs well? I think I'm sliding off the bottom of the slide there, so we'll just see if we can scroll that one down a bit. Okay, quite interesting there. So somewhat confident and not very confident. I'd be interested to know, when you say somewhat confident, how do you know that? Would be my follow-up question, because I think that would be something people might find interesting to explore later. And then my next question is, how often does your team do a cost review? That's very much in line with what I expected. I'm quite pleased with the top one. There's quite a lot of people doing them more regularly. Very good. Okay, so a bit of fun there. Now, when I speak to customers about cost management, the kinds of questions I'm asking start touching on problems that you have organizationally. Who's responsible for cost is probably the biggest problem in most companies. So everybody falls into one of the roles where they go, I have access to the billing data, but I don't know anything about the solutions. There's 50 different solutions you've built. I know nothing about them. Or you have somebody who knows about the solution, but doesn't have access or doesn't see the billing data. And there's a real organizational disconnect. That means that's where things go wrong. Cost management isn't really anybody's job. So that's where the bill just keeps getting bigger. So through the course of the talk, if you just bear in mind some of these thoughts in the back of your head, and what I'm going to talk about next is this journey we went through, starting with an integration team who had a desire to keep on top of their costs and how our good practices spread out and some of the results we found from that. Now, the challenge here is that for many organizations, we've got a real imbalance. We've been very focused on transformation, delivering business value, enabling users. And we've done some great stuff. Let's not take away some of the solutions people have built have delivered huge value for organizations. But while we've done that, quite often we've sacrificed sustainable costs. And what companies are starting to find on the cloud is that actually we can't keep going like we're going. we're starting to get a feeling that we're wasting money and we need to kind of do something about that. So the steps we took in our integration team to do this, first of all, we bought Turbo 360. So there's my product owner plug. But actually, what I want to get across is more the principles and the practices. So you can do these principles and practices with a third-party vendor, with your own tools. You can build your own scripts. The important bit to start with is the practices. So the first thing I think you need to do to be successful at cost management is democratize cost data. So we all hear about democratization of support and development, that kind of thing in the integration world. But really what I mean here is I need the cost data and the optimization to be the responsibility of the team who operate that solution. So that means that then you start breaking that organizational problem where the person who has access to the data doesn't know the solution and vice versa. We start putting this data in the hands of the people who are best placed to know, am I getting value for money? So what we did with Turbo 360 is you can kind of see here, we've got this tree view and we started building out a model, starting with the integration team. How can I map my 10 different resource groups across 5 different subscriptions, map these to a single place that I can get a holistic view of my team's data, and then we can start breaking down that data. And what we were able to do is by getting it on the tree view, we then opened features like the analysis here. So I could go and do things like get an easy view to say, last month my integration team spent this amount of money on these resources. How much are we doing this month? It becomes something that's really easy for me to do and doesn't take a big amount of effort. One of the problems many customers have is to get the billing data to do something with it takes days. Somebody's got to process it, get it into Excel. It gets shared around. And by the time it gets to the person who can do something, the data's already weeks out of date, probably. Here, we're trying to get to the point where I want to take action. Actionable FinOps is a term I use quite a lot. So I want to get insights into the people who can do something about it to save you money as soon as possible. Now, once we go past that initial democratization of cost data, the next thing we did as a team is we need monitoring in place. So one of the challenges that we find on Azure is that because it's very tied to the deployment model, you have to go to all of the different resource groups, all the different subscriptions. And if they're shared, you suddenly have a budget that might be shared across different teams. And what I really wanted was an integration team budget. Later on, I could, once I start getting more granular later in my team, I can do environment budgets or solution budgets. But to begin with, I just want an integration team budget. And here, what we were doing is we create a group budget here. And you can see that little red line's my daily budget. I have a preference for daily budgets because I want to know as soon as my spend goes out of sync. And as soon as something goes wrong, so you can see a couple of times we broke the budget, we get an alert. For us, we could send an alert to Teams to just tell people something's going wrong. You could also maybe send it to ServiceNow if you want to get an SLA on your alert and start treating it a bit like a proper support ticket because you really want to fix this problem. We also had anomaly detection down at the bottom, so you can see when things are changing in your environment. Sometimes a resource might have an unexpected cost and you want to get notified so you can start doing something about that as well. And for us, setting that up at the team level to begin with was a really easy thing to do. So really in a few hours here, we've got an effective working thing to get our team off the ground and up and running with some cost management approaches. The next step we did was we started putting in cost review processes. So here's a screen from Turbo 360 that we can look at. If you notice down here, here's the list of costs that I've got by service type. So I'm looking at things like how much am I spending on logic apps, how much am I spending on API management, etc. Now, what we're trying to do here on this screen is I want to make it easy for anybody who's got a basic Excel skill set to be able to look at these costs and do some. And with these little filters here, it's really easy for something like a team manager to go in and go, I'm not an Azure developer, but I can go in and see how much I've spent this month versus last month. And here I could do things like dig deeper. So I might go inside logic apps and say, how much have I spent on each individual logic app, or how much have I spent on each resource group or something like that. And what we're really trying to do over on the right here is work out what's the difference between this month and last month, because the big challenge, especially if you've got an existing environment, is where's the needles in the haystack that you can look at to work out either where things are going wrong or where I can save money. So particularly internally at Covi, we use this approach as well for our internal costs to say, here's the things that we've done well because we've seen you want to get to. Now, once we start getting past this, to begin with, those steps are about process, monitoring, getting the things in place. We now want to start looking at, can we start saving money? So one of the first things we did is we looked at the scheduler feature in Turbo 360. So this really hits on the FinOps concept of workload optimization. So the idea is, can I change the plan or the state of a workflow based on some kind of window, in this case, a time window, so that I can more efficiently use it. So in this case, an example might be, I want to turn my VM off at 6 at night, turn it back on at 9 in the morning. That's probably the easiest one. But here, we were doing a lot of logic app consumption. And the first thing you'd think is, well, my logic app consumption doesn't cost very much. But we had about 80 logic apps per environment that just sit Poland service bus all the time. And it's a tiny little cost for each connect. But when they're not doing anything, you multiply that by the number of logic apps, the number of environments. We actually saved quite a lot of money. I think we saved about $1,000 a month turning off non-production environments out of hours. And all we did here is we took the schedule, green means on, red means off, and we added the resources. So, instead of going and having to build a whole DevOps script, tick, 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 these are the logic apps I want in my schedule. There's it up and running in 10 minutes, and it's saving me money straight away. So a good example of the effect of that would be, here you could see as our logic apps in one of the environments were being used and deployed and become, they got fairly static on the cost. And this is the bit here, we turned the scheduler on and the cost just plummets because they're not really doing anything except when people are testing. So that's really perfect for non-prod. If we look at that across all of our environments, so here you would see this blue line is as we introduced logic apps into production, you'd expect that cost to be growing as you deploy new interfaces. But here's really where the scheduler kicked in. And what I would have found is my non-prod environments would go on a similar trend, maybe not as high because they wouldn't be processing as many messages, but suddenly I can start leveling that off. And you can see some of the environments drop down to really quite negligible costs. So that's quite a good cost saving. And this is just a logic apps example, but it's applicable to a lot of different resource types. The next thing we did was we looked at rightsizing. So rightsizing is the concept of, can I check the resources in Azure and make sure that they're appropriately sized based on the usage of that resource? So a simple example would be, if my VMs are large and it's not doing very much work, I can make it a small and I can save money. Now that concept applies to a lot of different resource types. So in our integration platform, we'd have things like app service plans for functions and logic app standard. We'd have VMs for data gateways, things, I'm trying to think of a few of those, Cosmos DB, SQL Azure. There's lots of different resources you can reconfigure. And again, needle in the haystack's a really important thing for me. So here on the tree view, I've got my integration team, and it shows me all of the big savings over here that I could get. Now, in my team, in this case, a lot of them are quite small after we'd tuned the resources. But here what I want to do is, this is the one that will save me the most money. Go and do something with that first. And that'll help me get all of my resources to an efficient place. With when you're right sizing, one of the difficult questions is you might have a VM shows up in the list, for example. And the question is, well, how do I know if this is a good decision or not? So we can click on that VM in the list, look at some of the metrics, and it helps us decide, is this a good thing to do to resize this VM? So really we're trying to stop it so that you don't have to go from an Excel spreadsheet of some extract, dig around in Azure, spend ages looking for working out if it's a good decision, get all that data to help you make the decision. And then if you configure Turbo 360 with the right permissions, you can just apply the right sizing straight from the tool if you wanted to, or you could go and take it outside and do it through Bicep or something similar. Now, in the interest of time for this presentation, there's a load of bits of this story I've chopped out because there's some really good other things that we've done. I've done a blog post with a bunch of videos going into a bit more detail on some of them. But one of the ones I thought I'd tell everybody about today, which is logic app and function specific, which I think is a good lesson for everybody to think about, was we had this, imagine a scenario, we've deployed function apps, particularly a few years ago. They're just sitting on Azure, running, doing their thing. Everybody's happy. And suddenly we're doing a cost review, and there's this defender for storage cost appearing in the review. And so I'm chatting to the guys, and I'm like, well, I don't remember us ever configuring defender for storage. Nobody's ever noticed it before, but it was actually quite a lot of money that we're spending. So what they did is you click through and you can see the list here. There's a few different cost savings that flag up potentially. Cost changes between this month and last month. And you can see, the defender for storage costs like $50 per storage account. And the first question is, well, where does that come from? We've never configured this. And what happened was, I think either at some point, and I'm not, to be honest, I'm not sure whether it was something Microsoft turned on by default or something our admins centrally turned on at subscription level. But suddenly this new cost appeared. And if you think from your perspective, you haven't changed any of your code, but you've suddenly got this new cost. And what we found was, if you look here, this is the per transaction metric for a storage account. So we're seeing 1.6 million storage transactions, and I think that's per 24 hours. And on storage, the defender costs that were configured were a per transaction charge. So I think on the next slide, you can see the costs here. So at the minute, we're paying 2 cents per 10,000 transactions, but we're doing 1.6 million a day across 5 or 6 storage accounts across multiple environments. So really what that added up to was that we're paying $6,900 a year more than what we were paying previously for something we didn't know had changed. And that's the kind of thing I think you've got to watch for in your environment. If you're not monitoring and reviewing cost, things can change outside of your control. Now, for us, in this case, we can actually change the plan. So there's 2 things you can do. Question 1 is, in this scenario, is Defender for storage a good choice? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. A lot of the Defender features around malware protection, and this was really around function triggers, where the transactions come from. But even if we change the flat rate price plan, that drops it to $10 a day, which was a significant cost saving across all of those accounts. So, little things like that are the takeaway. Check your storage accounts. You might be paying more than you're expecting. Now, as a practice, what we tried to do in the team was we thought about our maturity of cost management. So here on the left, we've got a model from the FinOps Foundation, and they talk about this idea of crawl, walk, run. Now, in the last sort of 6 months, what I've tended to find is the customers I speak to, a lot of them are in the role of sit, which is something I've added to the model because they're not really doing very much about cost management. And I think some of the indications from the poll earlier sort of says there's a lot of companies in here who are probably at this sit position. So what I'm trying to do is help you get off the ground, help you start moving, help you start to save money, help you start getting on top of cost management. Remember, cost management isn't just about saving money, it's also about reducing risk. If you have an unexpected cost and you don't detect it, that might be a real problem for you. So there's a number of angles this can come in. Now, what we would do is an iterative approach to managing costs, a really good way to make improvements, little steps forward all the time. So we start by analyzing, we then tune our monitoring, we then would optimize. That's where the right size, and we've got other features for the scheduler we touched on. There's reservation management features. So then we reanalyze the impact of the changes that we've made, and then we'll tune our monitoring again. As I know Aaron's in the front row here, I've just been looking at our internal costs from last month, and I've just tuned our monitoring yesterday because I think our monitoring was set at about 130 a day, and I think we're currently running at about 90 a day. So we've made some nice little tunings in the last month. And actually, if nobody ever changes your monitoring, then you're not going to know about a problem until it's quite a big problem. So in this integration team, our kind of I've grown up with a mindset of I care about spending people's money. I try to treat it as my own, just as a personal kind of trait. But I thought we were fairly efficient in our team. I know we did care about cost, and I think when I see some of the poll answers, I'd think we were in that box where people have ticked where you think you're quite good, you're somewhat confident. But actually the things that I did, we tuned our logic apps, that was 12 grand a year. We had a load of stuff that wasn't being used anymore. If we think about, Kent, I remember last year talked about the velocity of delivering with EIS means you're doing stuff really fast, which is great, you're adding business value. But a lot of the times projects forget to go back and say, we changed this, we no longer use it, let's get rid of it. I think there'll be loads of people out there who'll have resources you don't use that you may still be paying for. We saved about 20,000. If you're a Logic App Standard customer, you've got reservations come into play, so you can just commit to a certain price plan for a period of time. We'll get you a discount. You don't even need to change anything. And I think ballpark, we found about 50,000 a year worth of cost savings in our team where we thought we were quite good. Now, what happened is, as many organizations, after a period of time, senior management complain about the Azure bill. How many people here have never had their senior management complain about the Azure bill? Yeah, probably nobody's hand's going to go. Well, not many. Out of curiosity, the people who put their hands up, are they the senior management? And was it your own Azure bill? But the common messages I hear when I speak to people are the bill just keeps getting bigger. Your C-suite executives, we feel like our costs are out of control. We don't know how to get on top of it. And it really comes back to the problem of that complaint goes down and everybody goes, well, it's not really my problem to manage cost. And what I want to do is say, actually, it's everybody's problem. It's just a case you don't have the tools and the process to help, and the culture actually to help you manage it. So our good practices, one of the things we did is we made a lot of noise about telling people about the cost savings we were doing. I think doing a bit of PR, generally for an integration team, telling people about your success is a good way to get people to buy into your integration platform. We did that with a cost management, and then we had people coming to us and saying, can you help us look at our costs? And this is some of the stories of the things that we found when we started looking at some of the other teams' costs. And I think there's some I've picked the ones that I think are the most interesting for the audience today. So the first one was a SQL Azure database. It was in a data platform, so we've got Synapse, we've got ETL pipelines, we've got Spark jobs, we've got data lakes. And one of the things that's in this architecture is a SQL database. Now, I know this architecture really well because I terraformed it originally. And when we terraformed the environment, this SQL Azure database was a serverless SQL database with auto pause turned on. Now, what happened was I went away from that project. Other people have used the platform very effectively, delivered a lot of value for the business. And I'm looking at the team's costs and I see this little thing here showing up, and it tells me they're spending nearly $1,000 a month on SQL Azure database. And I'm like, well, hang on, this database has got one table in it with a key value pair of parameters, and they should never really touch it. Why is it costing $1,000 a month? I was expecting like $1 a month, so there's a big disconnect here. But nobody's ever really looked at it to say, is what we're doing now the way we intended for it to be used? So what happened here is, you can see this is the settings on Azure. We've got serverless mode. We've got, virtually no calls. The metrics over here are saying it's doing nothing, this database. The cost estimates, in the region of a few dollars. So why is each database costing $300, $400, $500 a month? There's actually multiple environments make up that $1,000. And what happened is, if you look in the metrics, there's a metric called app CPU build. So it's probably not one of the ones you'll look at by default because everybody looks at DTU and memory and CPU. App CPU build really influences how much you're going to pay for that serverless model. And what you can see here is that database is constantly being pinged, so it never goes to sleep. So I think what probably happened is the pipelines in Synapse would just regularly check in for these parameters, so the database never goes to sleep. Therefore, you've spent $1,000 a month. You've done that for at least 18 months that I know of, and that wasn't expected. So what we can do, change to the DTU model. We drop those databases down to in the range of $10 a month instead of $1,000 a month. There's a nice party night out for somebody. That's the example of the kind of things you might not see really obviously. The second story was an over-provisioned SQL database. So I'm looking at a team and they've got a whole bunch of SQL Azure databases. And this is the Rightsizing screen. So we're in the optimizer area. And I've got a list of databases showing up. And some of them are showing up like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 savings on them. And from the resource group name, my first thought was, oh, that's the UAT environment. Why is there a $5,000 database in the UAT environment? That doesn't make sense to me. There may be a good reason for it. But again, needle in the haystack, that's a little red flag that tells me go and check out what's going on. So I think there's a really important role here of like FinOps governance where you can ask questions of a team to say, we see this in your cost data. What does that mean? Does that make sense? And what we found was that this UAT database, so the first thing, business mission critical database here, 16 cores, 5,000 a month. If you notice up here, basically doing nothing. This is again one of the biggest problems, and I would pretty much guarantee everybody probably will find this somewhere in their Azure environment, is people deploy stuff, probably with a template, deployment's successful, the users go and use it, the users never complain because the application works really well, so nobody ever goes and looks at the resource because there's nobody complaining about it. The reason the users don't complain about it is because it performs really well, because it's 10 times bigger than it needs to be, and you're paying for that. So we, here all we do, first step one is we change that drop-down list from business critical to standard. It's the UAT environment. It's highly unlikely it needs to be business critical. Straight away, I've halved my cost, $5,000 to $2,500. I can then do other things though. So the question is, well, do we actually need this many calls if it's not doing much? So I could right size that database, scale it down. It may be the case, think of the scheduler I talked about before. So maybe what I can do, put this on the scheduler, tick the box, turn it on. Say, right, make this 2 calls overnight, make it 8 calls during the day, leave it as a standard. With this database, we got this down to like an $800 database instead of a $4,500. That's one database, a huge saving. The team had multiple databases that had been configured in this way because we're just deploying with our templates that successfully deploy stuff, and nobody complains, so we never look at it. Next, we had the oh my God moment. So my question here would be, if you had an unexpected cost in your environment right now, how long would it take before anybody knew you had a problem? And the answer to that's usually quite frightening. So here we had one where you can see the spike here. And I got an alert from Table 360 to tell me we've got a cost anomaly. It's a SQL database and it costs $35,000 a month. This is the biggest SQL database I think you can configure, if I remember right. And so the question at that point is, what do you do about that? So honestly, the fact we got that alert isn't the worst thing. The worst thing was that I asked people, what's this database used for? And nobody knew about it. That's the bad bit. So there you've got governance questions. Now, we actually had a legitimate reason for it. What was happening was a third-party vendor was doing a SQL migration. And to speed the migration up to be as quick as they possibly could, they've made the database as big as they possibly could because that'll make it run quicker. But they haven't told anybody they were going to do that. So you've got a governance question. Does that fall through the gap? You've got a policy question. One of the things you might want to do is think, do I need a policy here that stops that happening without an approval? In this case, this 15th of December is just before the Christmas break. So if nobody spotted that and everybody forgot to turn it down before Christmas, you're going to spend 20 grand while everybody's off on holiday. and come back to that unexpected bill. But fortunately, in this case, a bit of proactive monitoring, we can correct that quickly and get that sorted out. Rightsizing. So rightsizing is the biggest area that I think people will save money organizationally. So here we're looking holistically across all of the teams. Where are the things that don't look good? So really what we're doing is we're comparing the metrics against the cost and making some suggestions on things that you could do. So I've seen VMs that have got 10 grand cost savings for an individual VM just by putting it to the size based on what it's being used for. I also see many companies where there's sometimes it's just a $50 or $100 saving every month, but actually you might have 1,000 VMs, and just those little bits can really add up. So I think one of the takeaways would be just look at your right size, and it'll tell you where to save the quickest amount of money straight away, and then you can then invest that in tuning the other stuff. So there's just an example of one of those VMs showing how it was doing nothing, even though you're paying a fortune for it. So my optimization results, just from spending a tiny bit of time looking at a couple of teams, I found 15,000 a year for that low use SQL database that shouldn't be doing anything. There was 100,000 from those over provisioned SQL databases in one team, not the entire company, one team. We've talked about the big resource spike here. Reservations, we spotted over $1 million of potential savings. So obviously, some of them are low-hanging fruit. You can just go and change them. Some of them you'll need to go and impact assess to say, what does this application do? Who are the users for it? I've heard, I've chatted to somebody on one of my podcasts recently where there was a VM with a big cost saving, but nobody knew who owned the VM from a business perspective. So the company's cautious about downgrading the VM because they pay a lot of money for it, but nobody knows who'll complain if it stops working, which is, again, governance issues start coming into play. But for me, those are the big wins once you start getting into those kind of cost savings. Now, hopefully, I think we've only got a couple of minutes left. So my takeaways for today: this seesaw, this is going to change if it hasn't already for your organization. So sustainable costs are something you're going to be asked about. My sort of desire is to say to everybody, look, we can help you do this. Even if it's just learn from the content we publish online of things you can do. If your integration teams seem to be the best practice at cost management, you'll get asked to help other parts of the organization, which will be good for all your careers, good for your team. You'll be seen as the people who are efficient on cloud. Another thing that I think is going to be really big moving forward is this cloud unit economics concept. So it may not be familiar to people if you're not looking at the FinOps space much, but the idea here is the balance between how much do I pay for my solution to run versus how much value does it bring into the business. So, for example, if you're paying an absolute fortune, $1 million a year for a solution, but you only get 100 orders a month and the orders only come to 10,000, that solution doesn't make sense. I think that's where companies are going to want to get to, is prove the value of the solution, especially the more complex things get, the more we bring, AI, complicated integrations, APIs, everything's getting more and more complex. So understanding value for money is going to be really important. So I said learn more is one of the key things. So there's a few activities we've got on the go. Number one, so here on the left, we've got this FinOps podcast called FinOps on Azure. So what I'm trying to do here is we're focusing on Azure, number one, and I'm trying to reach out to people around the community to have discussions about cost management and effective running or cost-efficient running of Azure services. So for example, I was speaking to the Cosmos DB team last week, asking them what other things I should do on Azure to make sure I run Cosmos DB in a cost-effective manner. I was chatting to Nino recently about the relationship between FinOps and security and some of the kind of things we help each other out, and some of the trade-offs, cost management and security have some good trade-off concepts that I think are interesting. So hopefully that podcast's interesting for people. We've got a couple of white papers here. So this one's a recent one, which I quite like, which is about how I how I provide accountability and governance as a FinOps person to the teams in Covi. So I'm looking at what their spend is. I'm expecting them to tell me what things have changed and why they've changed. But I can easily look at Turbo 360 and see what's changed and ask them questions. So like next week I'll be grilling Aaron about any little cost changes we've had. We've got a paper here about the difference between Turbo 360 and Azure in terms of cost management. So even if you don't try us out, there is cost management features on Azure. Make sure you're using them if you're not using anything else, but that'll help you learn about some of our differences. And my takeaway, so my story was about bottom up cost management. So we did good practice that was recognized by other people because we told people about it. And then when we had a top down cost management driver, people already went, oh, we know they do it well. Let's go and get them to help us. That's where I want everybody to be. Be that cost management champion. You probably find that initial thing of everybody goes, it's not my job, but at least if you're interested in it and you can talk the right language to explain what optimizations you're doing, how you're spending it, how you're doing governance, that's going to help you. The reason I think this audience is good for cost management discussions is, for me, there's a big overlap between the soft skills that are important for integration people that are equally applicable to cost management. So that thing where you've got to get people from different audiences, different application teams, business stakeholders, you need to get them together and have a conversation about, in your case, integration requirements. But when it comes to cost tuning, you've got similar conversations going on. And I think in addition to that, everybody in the room is usually pretty experienced on Azure, so you'll understand what some of the optimizations mean from a technical perspective. And then my final thing is really spend 30 minutes a month reviewing your costs. Hats off to the people who said they do it once a month or more. I think in general, you're the exception. You're doing way more than most people are. This statement on the bottom is really from Accenture and Deloitte and people like that. 20 to 40% of cloud spend's waste is the estimate. So really, you can make a big difference in your organization just by helping reduce that spend. You can then reallocate those funds. You can buy extra resources. You can invest in new solutions. You can invest in people's training. There's money that you're spending right now that could be used for something better than filling Ken's pocket with more Logic App cash. Sorry, you were the closest I could say. I couldn't see any of the project. But you get the point. Let's not waste money. Let's spend it where we get some value back. One of my favorite things I've heard people do is gamifying. So if a team, which team this month had the best cost saving, send them for a night out for a dinner because it might cost you a couple of £100. They might have saved you 10 grand a year. That's a good investment for me. The other final thing I would say is we're doing a lot of work with partners at the moment in Turbo 360. So we've got some partners that are really excited and keen about cost management, people like Black Marble, Contiga, 345 Technology. We've been talking to these guys a lot about how partners can do added value services using our product to help them with their Azure customers. So again, if any partners or customers want to chat about these, feel free to come and give me a shout. Otherwise, I don't know if I've actually taken questions. I haven't caught the end of a session yet, but feel free. I'll give Martin the podium now, but feel free to give me a shout in the breaks. We'd love to come and chat to you. We're also doing workshops. So if any company wants us to come and do a private workshop with them, and we'll look at some of your costs and help you try some ideas out, please give us a shout as well. But thank you for listening. I hope everybody enjoys the conference this week.